They say the most dangerous men in New York don't have hearts. They have rules, they have codes, and they have bullets. Lorenzo Moretti was the king of Little Italy, a man whose silence was louder than a gunshot. He had the city in his pocket and ice in his veins. But he didn't count on one thing: a broke waitress in a stained apron, speaking a dialect of Italian that hadn't been heard in his family's kitchen for 20 years. When she whispered to his mother, she didn't just calm a confused old woman. She signed her own warrant for a love that could burn the city to the ground. This is the story of how a few words changed the fate of the mob. The rain on Mulberry Street didn't wash away the grime. It just made the neon signs of Little Italy bleed onto the pavement. Inside Gino's Corner, a diner that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and floor wax, Sienna Rossi was on hour 10 of a double shift. Her feet throbbed in rhythm with the flickering fluorescent light overhead. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be finishing her degree at NYU, or at least working a job where the customers didn't treat her like a piece of furniture. But when her brother, Luca, got sick, the tuition money became rent money, and the rent money became medication money. Now she was just Sienna the waitress, the girl who never smiled enough for the tourists. "Excuse me, miss, my mother ordered the Earl Grey 10 minutes ago." The voice was sharp, cutting through the clatter of silverware. Sienna turned, wiping her hands on her apron. In booth 4, a man in a suit that cost more than Sienna's entire life earnings was standing up, looking agitated. But it wasn't him Sienna looked at. It was the woman sitting across from him. She was elderly, frail, with hair like spun silver and eyes that looked lost in a fog. She was trembling, pushing a plate of perfectly good biscotti away, muttering frantically, "Non lo voglio." "Dove lui? Dove Antonio?" the woman whimpered, her hands shaking. The manager, a sweaty man named Frank, was already rushing over. "Is there a problem, sir? I can have the girl removed if she's bothering the lady." "The problem," the bodyguard growled, "is that Mrs. Moretti is upset, and nobody here speaks." Sienna didn't wait. She walked past Frank, past the looming bodyguard, and crouched down beside the booth. She ignored the expensive suit. She looked directly into the old woman's panicked eyes. "Signor," Sienna said softly. Her voice changed. The flat American accent dropped, replaced by the melodic, guttural cadence of the old country, specifically the dialect of the hills outside Palermo. "Tale signora, non che nuduca, semu sulu nu autri." "Look, ma'am, there is no one here. It is just us." The diner went silent. The bodyguard froze. The old woman stopped shaking. She blinked, her focus sharpening on Sienna's face. It was as if the sound of the specific dialect acted as an anchor, pulling her back from the drift of her dementia. "Palermo?" the woman whispered. "Vicino," Sienna smiled, a sad, genuine smile. "Corleone, my grandmother taught me. She said it's the language for secrets and recipes." The old woman let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping. She reached out and touched Sienna's cheek with a paper-thin hand. "You have kind eyes, like my Antonio." "Eat your biscotti, Bella," Sienna urged gently, using the dialect again, "or the coffee gets cold and God gets angry." The woman laughed, a dry, rasping sound, and picked up a biscotti. Sienna stood up, her knees cracking slightly, and turned to go back to the counter. That was when she felt the air in the room change. It became heavy, charged, like the static before a lightning strike. The bell above the door hadn't rung, but everyone was looking at the entrance. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed by a tailor who understood violence. He was tall, his dark hair swept back, his jawline shadowed by a day's growth of beard. He wore a charcoal overcoat, the collar turned up against the rain. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently fixed on Sienna with the intensity of a predator spotting movement in the grass. This was Lorenzo Enzo Moretti, the capo, the head of the Moretti crime family, the man the newspapers called the Prince of Mulberry Street, and the police called unreachable. He walked slowly toward booth 4, the The bodyguard stepped aside immediately, head bowed. Frank, the manager, looked like he was about to faint. Enzo didn't look at his mother. He looked at Sienna. "What did you say to her?" His voice was low, a baritone rumble that vibrated in Sienna's chest. It wasn't a threat, exactly, but it demanded an answer. Sienna swallowed hard. She knew who he was. Everyone in the neighborhood knew. "You didn't talk to Enzo Moretti unless he talked to you, and you certainly didn't stare him down." But Sienna was tired, her feet hurt, and she had just calmed down an old lady while his paid muscle had done nothing. "I told her to eat her biscotti before God gets angry," Sienna said, her voice shaking only slightly. Enzo's eyes narrowed. He looked down at his mother, who was happily dunking her cookie in her tea, completely at peace. He looked back at Sienna. "You speak the dialect, the old one, not the textbook Italian they teach at the university." "My nonna was strict," Sienna said, clutching her order pad. Enzo took a step closer. He smelled of rain, expensive tobacco, and sandalwood. He invaded her personal space, dominating the room. He reached into his pocket. Sienna flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a money clip. He peeled off $100 bill, then another, then another. He placed a stack of 5 on the table. "For the service," he said. Sienna looked at the money. It was more than she made in 2 weeks. It could pay for Luca's inhalers. It could fix the leak in their ceiling. "I can't take that," she said. The room gasped. Frank made a choking sound. "You didn't say no to Lorenzo Moretti." Enzo paused, his hand hovering over the cash. A flicker of surprise crossed his stoic face. "Excuse me?" "I did my job," Sienna said, lifting her chin. She was scared. "I helped. I didn't do it for a tip, and I certainly didn't do it for charity." Enzo stared at her for a long, agonizing silence. He studied her frayed collar, the dark circles under her eyes, the defiance in her stance. "It's not charity," Enzo said softly. "It's tribute. You did something my doctors and my men couldn't do. You brought her back." "Keep it." Sienna turned away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Just make sure she finishes her tea." She walked back to the kitchen, her legs trembling. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen Lorenzo Moretti watching her retreat, not with anger, but with a terrifying curiosity. He picked up the money, folded it slowly, and put it back in his pocket. "Dario," Enzo said to his bodyguard, never taking his eyes off the kitchen door. "Boss, find out who she is, where she lives, who she owes, everything." "She's just a waitress, Enzo." "No," Enzo murmured, watching the kitchen door swing shut. "She just spoke to the only woman I love in a language only we understand. She's not just a waitress. She's an opportunity." 3 days later, the opportunity knocked, literally. Sienna was in her apartment in the Bronx, a 4th-floor walk-up with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanged like a dying engine. She was counting crumpled 1s and 5s on the kitchen table. "We're short again," Luca said from the couch. He was 18, pale, and too thin. The asthma and the complications from his pneumonia last winter had left him weak. "I can skip the specialist this month, Si. I feel fine." "You are not skipping the doctor," Sienna snapped, though her tone was weary, not angry. "I'll pick up an extra shift at the club, or maybe I can sell Nonna's locket." "No," Luca sat up. "Not the locket." A heavy knock on the door made them both jump. It wasn't the landlord. He knocked with a rhythmic rap-rap-rap. This was a single authoritative thud. Sienna moved to the peephole. She saw a distorted fisheye view of a suit. Her stomach dropped. "Who is it?" Luca whispered. "Stay here," Sienna hissed. She opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain on. Standing in the hallway was the bodyguard from the diner, Dario. He was massive, with a neck that seemed to swallow his chin. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, leaning casually against the graffiti-stained wall, was Lorenzo Moretti. "Miss Rossi," Enzo said. He knew her name. Of course he did. "What do you want?" Sienna asked, gripping the doorframe. To talk. Open the door, Sienna. I'll scream, she threatened. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, is a retired cop. Enzo smirked, a dry, humorless expression. Mr. Henderson is currently at the OTB betting on horses, and he's taking the bribe I sent him to ignore this floor for 20 minutes. Open the door. Sienna looked at Luca, who was terrified. She realized she had no choice. If they wanted to hurt her, a chain lock wouldn't stop them. She undid the latch and opened the door. Enzo walked in, his presence making the small apartment feel microscopic. He looked around, taking in the poverty, the mismatched furniture, the stack of medical bills on the counter, the damp stain on the ceiling. He didn't look disgusted. He looked validating. You have a debt, Enzo stated, looking at the bills. $72,000 in medical expenses, student loans, back rent. Are you the IRS now? Sienna crossed her arms. I'm better than the IRS. I settle things. Enzo turned to her. My mother has been asking for you. She calls you the girl with the voice. She won't eat for the nurses. She throws things at the doctors. But she asks for you. I'm sorry she's sick, Sienna said, but I'm a waitress, not a nurse. I don't need a nurse. I can buy 100 nurses. I need a companion, someone who understands the culture, someone she trusts. Enzo took a step closer. I'm offering you a job. Live in my estate in Long Island. You care for my mother? You talk to her? You keep her calm? Sienna laughed nervously. Work for the Mafia? No thanks. I like my life boring. Do you? Enzo gestured to Luca. Do you like watching your brother wheeze because you can't afford the good meds? Do you like working 60 hours a week to live in a shoebox? Don't talk about him. Sienna stepped in front of Luca protectively. I'll pay off the medical debt, Enzo said calmly. All of it, immediately, plus $10,000 a month salary, room and board included. The silence in the room was deafening. Luca looked at Sienna, his eyes wide. It was a lifeline, a golden ticket. But it was signed in blood. Why me? Sienna whispered. There are 1 million Italians in New York. Not like you, Enzo said. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. You have fire, Sienna. You stood up to me in the diner. You're standing up to me now. My mother needs that strength. She's surrounded by sycophants and soldiers. She needs family. I'm not your family. You could be, Enzo said, the words hanging with a double meaning that made Sienna's skin prickle. 1 month, trial period. If you hate it, you leave, and I pay the debts anyway. No strings. There are always strings with men like you, she countered. Then bring your scissors, Enzo replied smoothly. Is it a yes? Sienna looked at Luca. She looked at the bills. She thought of the cold wind on Mulberry Street and the ache in her feet. She looked at Enzo Moretti, the devil in a bespoke suit, offering her salvation. Luca comes with me, she said. He needs fresh air, and I don't trust you to leave him alone. Dario scoffed. It's a fortress, not a daycare. Enzo held up a hand to silence Dario. He looked at Sienna with a newfound respect. Done. The guest cottage is empty. Pack your things. We leave in an hour. As Enzo turned to leave, he paused at the door. And Sienna? What? Don't ever speak to Dario like that again. He has a temper. I'm the only one who finds your defiance charming. He walked out. Sienna sank onto the couch, her legs giving way. She had just made a deal with the king of Little Italy. She had sold her soul to save her brother. But as she packed her meager belongings, she couldn't stop thinking about the look in Enzo's eyes. It wasn't just calculation. It was loneliness, deep, crushing loneliness. And for a dangerous moment, she wondered if she was walking into the lion's den to be eaten, or if she was the one thing the lion actually needed. The Moretti estate in Sands Point was less of a house and more of a monument to power. High iron gates, cameras swiveling like mechanical owls, and grounds so manicured they looked artificial. Sienna and Luca were installed in the guest cottage, which was larger than their entire apartment building in the Bronx. It was luxurious, quiet, and terrifying. For the first week, Sienna barely saw Enzo. He was a phantom, leaving in black SUVs before dawn and returning long after midnight. Her world revolved around Isabella Moretti. Isabella was difficult. She had days where she threw porcelain teacups at the wall, screaming about people who had been dead for 30 years. But Sienna was patient. She sat with her, speaking in the low, rolling dialect of the Sicilian hills. She cooked pasta alla norma, using her grandmother's recipe, frying the eggplant just right, salting the ricotta salata heavily. The smell of the food seemed to work magic. Isabella would eat, and as she ate, she would talk. "Lorenzo, he is too hard," Isabella murmured one afternoon in the sunroom. "He carries the weight of his father, my husband. He was a cruel man. Lorenzo thinks he has to be cruel to be strong." "He loves you, Signora," Sienna said, adjusting the blanket over Isabella's knees. "He loves me, yes. But he does not know how to love himself. He is hollow." Isabella looked at Sienna sharply. "You must fill him, child." Sienna flushed. "I am just the help, nonna." "Bah!" Isabella waved a hand. "I see how he looks at the security monitors when you are in the garden. He watches." Sienna froze. "He watches?" That evening, the phantom appeared. Sienna was in the main house kitchen, stealing a glass of water late at night. She was wearing a silk robe she'd found in the cottage closet. Too nice, really. But her old flannel one had holes. She turned around and nearly dropped the glass. Enzo was sitting at the kitchen island, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, his tie undone, the top buttons of his shirt open. He looked exhausted. "You're up late," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel tumbling over velvet. "I couldn't sleep. The quiet. It's loud out here. In the Bronx there are sirens." Enzo swirled his drink. "I can have Dario fire a gun outside your window every hour if it helps." Sienna couldn't help but smile. "That won't be necessary. My mother seems happier," Enzo said. "She actually recognized me today. She called me Enzo, not Antonio. That hasn't happened in months. She just needed to feel safe. Language is safety." Enzo stood up and walked around the island. He moved with that predatory grace that always put Sienna on edge. He stopped a few feet from her. "And you, Sienna? Do you feel safe?" "I feel kept," she answered honestly, "like a bird in a very expensive cage." "Safety requires walls," Enzo said. "My world is dangerous. I built this place to keep the wolves out." "Sometimes the wolves are on the inside," she said softly. Enzo stepped closer, encroaching on her space again. The air between them crackled. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Then he tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her skin, rough calluses against soft warmth. Sienna stopped breathing. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" Enzo whispered. "You see the suits and the house. You don't see the blood." "I see a man who loves his mother," Sienna whispered back, her voice trembling. "And a man who is tired of being alone." Enzo's eyes darkened. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. For a moment she thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to kiss her. God help her. Suddenly his phone buzzed on the counter. The spell shattered. Enzo pulled back, his face hardening instantly into the mask of the Don. He checked the screen. His jaw tightened. "Go to bed, Sienna. Lock your door." "Enzo, go," he barked. Sienna fled back to the cottage. But as she ran across the lawn, she saw headlights sweeping the driveway. 3 black cars, men getting out. She saw Dario greeting them, but his body language was wrong. It wasn't respectful. It was conspiratorial. She hid behind a hedge, watching. She saw Dario talking to a man she didn't recognize, a man with a scar running down his cheek. They were exchanging a thick envelope. Dario pointed towards the main house, then towards the guest cottage. Sienna's blood ran cold. Dario wasn't just a bodyguard. He was the wolf on the inside. She rushed into the cottage, shaking Luca awake. "We have to lock everything, now." "What? Why?" "Because Sienna said, checking the window locks. "I think the gilded cage is about to become a slaughterhouse." She didn't know that inside the main house, Enzo was staring at the security feed, watching her run. He hadn't sent those cars. The war had come to Sands Point. The silence of Sands Point was not broken by a scream, but by the shattering of glass. It was a precise, tinkling sound, like ice falling onto a tile floor, followed immediately by the dull thwack of a silencer. Inside the guest cottage, Sienna shoved Luca into the small crawl space behind the pantry. It was a tight squeeze, meant for plumbing access, but it was the only place that wasn't obvious. "Stay there," she hissed, her hands shaking so hard she could barely latch the panel. "Don't make a sound, not even if you hear me scream. Do you understand?" "Sienna, no!" Luca grabbed her wrist, his eyes wide with panic. "Come in with me." "I can't. If they find the cottage empty, they'll search until they find you. I have to lead them away." She kissed his forehead, tasting the salt of his sweat. "I love you. Count to 1,000, then count again." She closed the panel and slid a heavy crate of olive oil in front of it. She grabbed the heaviest knife from the butcher block, a carbon steel chef's knife she had used to chop garlic hours ago. She killed the lights. The cottage plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the sweeping headlights of the intruder vehicles outside. Sienna crouched behind the kitchen island. She heard the front door of the cottage kick open. "Check the bedroom," a voice growled. It wasn't Dario. It was a stranger. "Boss says the girl is leverage. The brother is disposable." Disposable. The word lit a fire in Sienna's belly that burned away the fear. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a sister. Footsteps crunched on the hardwood. Heavy, confident steps. A beam from a flashlight cut through the dark, sweeping over the sofa, the television, the kitchen counters. The man walked past the island. Sienna saw his silhouette. He was holding a submachine gun. He turned toward the hallway where the bedrooms were. Sienna moved. She didn't think, she reacted. She rose from the shadows and swung the heavy cast-iron skillet she had left on the stove. Not the knife, which required proximity, but the pan, which had weight. Clang! The iron connected with the back of the man's head with a sickening thud. He crumpled without a sound, his gun skittering across the floor. Sienna gasped, dropping the pan. She stared at the unconscious man. I just... Suddenly the glass sliding door behind her shattered. Sienna spun around, raising the knife. "Don't stab me, Sienna," a voice rasped. It was Enzo. He looked like a demon rising from hell. His white shirt was soaked in crimson on the left shoulder. He held a pistol in his right hand, his face splattered with blood that wasn't his. "Enzo!" She dropped the knife. "Where is Luca?" "Hidden. Safe." "Good. We move. Now." Enzo grabbed her arm with his good hand. His grip was iron, but his skin was burning hot. "My mother," Sienna started. "Panic room," Enzo grunted, pulling her toward the back exit. "She's sealed in. Safest place on Earth. But they breached the perimeter codes. Dario gave them the codes. I saw him," Sienna panted as they sprinted into the rainy night. "I saw him talking to a man with a scar." Enzo froze for a split second, his face twisting in a snarl. "Scar, that's Vinny the Butcher Falcone. Dario didn't just sell me out. He sold me to the butchers." They reached the garage, a separate structure housing Enzo's collection of cars. Enzo punched a code into the keypad. Nothing happened. "They cut the power," he cursed. "Manual override." He moved to lift the heavy garage door, but his left arm gave way, and he hissed in pain, stumbling against the wall. Fresh blood bloomed on his shirt. "Let me!" Sienna shoved him aside. She grabbed the chain hoist and pulled with everything she had. Her muscles screamed, her waitress shifts lifting heavy trays finally paying off. The door rattled up 3 feet, enough to crawl under. "Get in the Maserati," Enzo ordered, sliding under the door. "Passenger side. You can't drive, you're bleeding out. And you can't drive a stick shift with 600 horsepower in the rain. Watch me," Sienna snatched the keys from his blood-slicked hand. She had learned to drive on a beat-up truck her uncle owned. A car was a car. She slid into the driver's seat. The leather smelled of him, sandalwood and danger. She pushed the start button. The engine roared to life, a ferocious growl that vibrated through the chassis. Enzo slumped into the passenger seat, clutching his shoulder. "Don't kill us, Rossi!" Sienna threw the car into reverse. She slammed on the gas. The tires squealed, smoking against the concrete, and they shot backward out of the garage just as bullets began to ping against the metal door. "Go! Left!" Enzo shouted. Sienna spun the wheel. The car fish-tailed, mud spraying, then found traction. She sped down the winding driveway. Ahead, the main gates were blocked by two black SUVs. Men were standing there, weapons raised. "Ram them!" Sienna yelled, her heart hammering in her throat. "No, they'll shred the windshield. Go off-road, through the rose garden." "Your mother's roses? Screw the roses!" Sienna yanked the wheel. The low-slung sports car hit the grass, bottoming out with a terrible scrape, and ploughed through the manicured hedges. Rose petals and mud exploded over the windshield. They bounced violently, the suspension groaning. They bypassed the gate, crashing through a wooden fence and landing on the county road with a spark-showering thud. Sienna didn't lift her foot. She shifted gears, the engine screaming as they hit 80, then 90. Enzo looked back. No headlights followed them immediately. He let out a long, ragged breath and slumped against the door. "You drive like a maniac," he murmured, his eyes fluttering shut. "Where are we going?" Sienna asked, her voice high and tight. "Hospital?" "No hospitals. They'll finish the job there. Falcone has eyes everywhere." Enzo's voice was fading. "Brooklyn, Dumbo, 42 Washington Street keys, in the glove box. Enzo, Enzo." His head lolled to the side. He was unconscious. Sienna was alone, driving a stolen supercar, with a dying Mafia Don beside her, and her brother hidden in a crawl space miles away. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She just drove. The safe house was not a house. It was the top floor of an abandoned clock factory in Dumbo, overlooking the East River. The freight elevator groaned as it ascended, carrying the weight of the car. Yes, the elevator was large enough for the car. Enzo had apparently prepared for everything, except betrayal. Sienna parked the battered Maserati in the center of the vast, open-plan loft. The space was cold, filled with industrial shadows and covered furniture. She dragged Enzo out of the car. He was semi-conscious now, mumbling in Italian. "Help me, Enzo. You're too heavy," she grunted, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Together they stumbled toward a large leather sofa in the center of the room. She lowered him onto it. "Whiskey," Enzo rasped, pointing vaguely at a cabinet, "and the kit. Under the sink." Sienna moved fast. She found a first aid kit that looked more like a field medic's trauma bag. She grabbed a bottle of bourbon from the shelf. She knelt beside him. "This is going to hurt." "Do it!" She cut his shirt open. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder. It was ugly, bleeding sluggishly, but it hadn't hit the artery or the bone. "It's a through and through," Sienna said, her hand surprisingly steady. "I have to clean it." "No koa." She poured the bourbon over the wound. Enzo arched his back, a guttural roar of pain escaping his throat. His hand shot out and gripped her arm, squeezing hard enough to bruise. "Breathe," Sienna commanded, slipping back into the dialect. "Respira, Enzino. Respira." The use of the childhood diminutive, Enzino, made his eyes snap open. He looked at her, his pupils dilated with pain and shock. He released his grip on her arm, his hand sliding down to rest on her waist. Sienna worked quickly. She cleaned the wound, packed it with gauze, and wrapped it tightly. She wasn't a doctor, but she had patched up Luca's scrapes and cuts for years. This was just bigger. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, wiping her bloody hands on a rag. She was trembling now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, shaking terror. Enzo watched her. The pain was receding into a dull throb, replaced by a clarity that was almost sharper. He saw the blood on her waitress uniform. He saw the dirt on her cheek. He saw the fierce, unyielding light in her eyes. "You saved me," he said. The silence of the loft amplified his voice. "I saved myself," Sienna deflected, standing up to wash her hands in the small sink. "You were just the getaway car. You could have run when we hit the road. You could have dumped me and gone to the police. And let Dario find Luca." Sienna turned off the tap and faced him. "I'm not stupid, Enzo. The police can't stop men like Falcone. Only men like you can stop men like him." Enzo tried to sit up, wincing. "I miscalculated. Dario, he was with me for 10 years. He held my mother's hand at my father's funeral." "Everyone has a price," Sienna said bitterly. "Maybe his price was just higher than your loyalty." "What is your price, Sienna?" The question hung in the air. Sienna walked over to him. She looked down at the most powerful man in the city, now broken and bleeding on a dusty sofa. "My brother, safely out of the country, with enough money to never worry about a doctor again." "Done," Enzo said. "Tomorrow. I have a plane." "Good. But you stay." Sienna froze. "What?" "Luca goes. You stay." Enzo's eyes were dark, burning with a fever that wasn't from the wound. "Because you are the only person in this city who hasn't lied to me today. And because—" He struggled to stand. Sienna instinctively reached out to steady him. He didn't pull away. He leaned into her, his forehead resting against hers. "Because," she whispered, her breath hitching, "because when you spoke to me in the car, when you yelled at me to breathe, you sounded like the only home I have left." Enzo lifted his good hand and cupped her face. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. The smell of copper blood and bourbon was overwhelming, intoxicating. "You stole my heart, Sienna," he murmured, the words rough and unpolished. "In the diner. You took it. I'm just now realizing I don't want it back." Sienna's heart pounded against her ribs. This was wrong. He was a criminal, a killer. But he was also the man who had offered to save her brother without hesitation. He was the man who loved his mother enough to build a fortress for her. "I can't be part of this life, Enzo," she said, though she didn't pull away. "Then I will burn this life down and build a new one," he vowed. "But not tonight. Tonight, I just need to know if you are real." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, a collision of survival and need. It tasted of fear and whiskey. Sienna hesitated for a fraction of a second, then her hands wound into his hair, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with all the pent-up frustration of her life. The anger at being poor, the fear of losing Luca, the rage at the world. For a moment, in the shadows of the clock factory, time stopped. But the world outside was still turning. And it was turning against them. Enzo pulled back, breathless, his forehead resting against hers. "I need to make a call. I have a secondary team. We need to get Luca." "Is he safe?" Sienna asked, the reality crashing back in. "If the cottage wasn't burned, he's safe. Dario doesn't know about the crawl space. He thinks the cottage is just for guests." Enzo limped to the desk where a dusty landline phone sat, untraceable. He dialed a number. Sienna watched him, her lips swollen, her mind racing. She noticed something on the desk next to the phone. It was an old photograph in a silver frame, face down. She turned it over. It was a black and white photo of a group of men standing in front of a butcher shop. In the center was a young Enzo. Next to him was his father, and standing slightly behind them, looking young and terrified, was a woman in an apron. Sienna gasped. She knew that woman. It wasn't Isabella Moretti. It was her own grandmother. Nonna Rosa. "Enzo," Sienna interrupted, her voice trembling. He hung up the phone and looked at her. "They're on their way to the estate. Luca will be—" He stopped when he saw her face. "What is it?" Sienna held up the photo. "Why is my grandmother in this picture with your father?" Enzo's face went pale. He moved across the room, ignoring his pain, and took the photo from her hand. He looked at it, then at Sienna. A dawn of realization broke over his features, a look of horror and awe. "Rosa," Enzo whispered. "Rosa the cook. My father's confidant. She was a seamstress," Sienna argued. "She told me she was a seamstress." "She was the only woman my father ever trusted with the family recipes," Enzo said slowly, "and the family secrets. She disappeared 20 years ago. My father said she stole something from him." Sienna stepped back. "Stole what?" Enzo looked at Sienna, really looked at her. The shape of her eyes, the fire in her spirit, the way she spoke, the dialect. "She didn't steal money," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She stole the ledger, the Libro Rosso, the Red Book. It contains the names of every corrupt judge, cop, and politician in New York. It's the ultimate insurance policy. My father looked for it until the day he died." Sienna shook her head. "I don't know anything about a book. She left me nothing. Just recipes and—" her voice trailed off. "The recipes." "My nonna's cookbook," Sienna whispered. "It's in the apartment in the Bronx. She made me swear never to lose it. She said the ingredients were special." Enzo grabbed his coat. The pain in his shoulder was forgotten. "The Vanzetti family and Falcone aren't attacking me just for territory," Enzo realized, his eyes hard as flint. "They found out who you are. Dario must have run a background check deeper than I did.